I'm honestly not exaggerating when I say that yesterday the chess world witnessed the most incredible domination in a single match that I've ever seen. We had Magnus Carlsen, the reigning world champion, playing against Fabiano Caruana, who was playing against him for the 2018 World Championship. Now, Fabi is an absolute beast. Any other generation, he'd probably have been world champion, but he was in the Magnus era. Now, easily the second best player in the world for a long time. He's slipped off a bit recently, but a seriously good player. What Magnus did to him in this match was just unprecedented. So I want to show you in this video my favourite game from the whole match. And then at the end of the video, I'll reveal here the actual match result. And I also want to show you a bonus checkmate, which was truly incredible. Let's have a look at this brilliant game. Queen sack coming. So Magnus has white, kicks off with e4. e5 on the board, knight f3, knight c6, and now bishop b5 was played, the Ruy Lopez or Spanish variation. We had a6, and now the bishop drops back. Not going to spend too long on these standard opening moves. Knight f6, castles, and now this is a small interesting moment. Bishop e7 is main line here. Then you get rook e1 main line, and then b5 breaking with the pawn. But what we had here from Magnus was Fabi was the immediate b5, kicks back the bishop, and then this bishop develops to c5, a more active variation. So this is known as the Archangel, by the way. Now, Fabi doesn't go, I keep mixing the players up. Carlsen doesn't go pawn c3, the kind of classic Spanish move. He goes pawn a4 here, nibbling away on the queen side. The rook comes to b8, breaking that pin down the a file. We have a captures, pawn recaptures, and now the more modest pawn to d3, not the c3 stuff, d6 from black, and now the bishop develops, challenging that strong dark squared bishop that Fabi's got. Now, you can take here, it's a plausible way to play, but you do open up this f-file for the rook for white. You also help take control of these squares, to offset the double pawns. So, yeah, Magnus wasn't too afraid of that one. Instead, we had castles. He lets this bishop be captured, pawn takes back, because Fabi's now arguing, okay, I've got a good clamp on this d4 square, maybe I can hop a knight there later on. And now instructive moment from Magnus. Knight c3 looks really natural, but then you're running into bishop to g4, and with knight d4 coming, this is a really uncomfortable pin. So the knight comes to d2, much more logical move. Now queen d6, covers this pawn, also this one, prepares to free the knight. You can bring the rook into the game as well now. Pawn h3 was played here, stops the bishop g4 stuff. h6 now from Fabi, he creates some luft for his king. Rook e1, and now rook d8 hits this half open d file here. Keep tripping on my words today. And now this is an interesting moment. So the queen sack is coming, right? So one of the more logical ways to play here is knight to f1. You leave the queen at home, you prepare to improve this knight. There's no bishop g4 anymore. But what Magnus does here is queen to e2. And it's a very provocative move, because after knight h5, which Fabi plays, this knight's coming to f4, hitting the queen, so why did you put it on that square? And you can't go g3, or then you lose the pawn here. So what's Magnus got in mind? Well, can you guess what he played in this position here? Oh, excuse me. So the move he played was knight to g5. Incredible combative move, going after this pawn. Now, if you capture the knight, then white's better after queen takes on h5. You're hitting this sensitive point. If g6, well, you can capture here. No, I was about to say possibly you can capture here using the pin, but sorry, the queen's on that pawn. So takes on g5 is best. Now no queen g6, or you lose the queen, the pawn is pinned. And if black goes queen f6 covering this pawn, then there's knight f3 coming into g5. So there's lots of problems if you take the white knight. So Fabi went knight to f4, best move in the position, counter-attacking the white queen. What does Magnus do? Only move to stay on top. So yes, he crashes through on f7 with the knight. And what I find so incredible about this queen sack is he's giving the queen up with check. So takes was played, rook recaptures, But here's the thing, because you've got this deadly check coming, queen and rook are attacked, you have to move the queen. It comes to f6, best move, and now when you take the rook, you do it with check. So after the king goes, knight takes, queen takes, what's the material count? Well, Magnus here, he's got a knight, a rook, and an extra pawn, count one of them, for the queen. So a rough material balance, but often the queen is more dangerous in these kind of positions, especially if the board starts opening up. So we see c3 now from Magnus, c4 from Fabi, excellent move, because you hit both of these at the same time. So the pawn captures, pawn takes back, and after the bishop goes, well, now you've opened new lines for a new piece. Really excellent quality from both players in this match. It really was. Now, the queen comes to g6. You could go to a6, hold this pawn, whole different line. Don't want to go down that one. But Fabi comes to g6 here. Very logical in blitz. You're going after the king. There's now a pin. This bishop's coming. But Magnus plays the best move. He does this one, allows it. I mean, you couldn't really stop it. You could go king h1, but then there's new problems. So he takes the pawn, allows bishop h3, but then swings back with the knight to cover the g2 square. What a monster this knight is on e3. Now Fabi drops the bishop back, breaks that pin. Now we get b4 from Magnus. So the rook came to d8, coming to that open file, and because it's such a powerful piece, Magnus challenges. We see an exchange here, bishop recaptures, and now h5 from Fabi. Excellent move, trying to rip open the king. You want to start checking, try and pick off some of these pieces if they don't stay coordinated. Rook d2 from Magnus comes to the file, frees a square for the bishop, pawn h4, bishop e2, and now you could start with the immediate h3 here. Instead, queen g5 was played, still a good move, eyeing some sensitive points here, such as the undefended rook. And now Magnus proceeds with bishop to c4, doesn't even mind that after captures, knight captures, the queen is on the rook because it's defended by the knight. I mean, just exceptional calculation by both players. And now we get the big battle. After pawn h3, Magnus drops back, again covers like this. And the battle is to see who can actually coordinate the pieces. Magnus with his minors and a major, or the queen trying to check, pick up loose ones. So we had pawn takes on g2. And now Magnus doesn't rush to recapture. I mean, the rook would be hanging if you go with the knight. So he brings this rook to d7. And now queen h4 threatens to land a deadly check here. So Magnus now takes the pawn with the knight. But by the way, one fascinating line I found when clicking around, you can actually take on g7 here with check. Because if the king recaptures, well, you fork these two. Now, the king can go to the corner here, and then you get something like this, similar-ish to the game. But just a fascinating line, seeing these pieces working together. But Magnus takes on g2, the queen now takes on e4, and we have rook takes on c7. Magnus has now got a clear outside passer, two connected pawns, but queen d3. Here comes the queen, it's going to start checking. The knight came to e3. King g6, and this is such good play by Fabi. Rook c5, and he goes king g5, abandons the pawn. You could have gone queen e4, but then there's b5. You know, that starts running very quick. Really not easy to judge. I mean, look at the time situation, seconds on the clock. King g5 played, gives the pawn with check, but king f4, just fantastic from Magnus. Now we had this, and pawn c4 now saves this pawn. But again, it's a very interesting moment, because if you go rook c5 to hold the pawn, prepare to push b5, well, now the king can come into f3. If you keep pushing the pawn, now you're in serious trouble. In fact, you just lost, because you check, and if the king comes here, you get mated like this. If the king goes to the corner, then the king gobbles the f2 pawn, and again, there's mate threats, there's loose pieces. White is simply lost here. So it's really fascinating how Magnus just recognizes this. So he goes c4 instead, keeps the rook here, keeps the black king cut. Now he does give this pawn, check, king goes, this one's taken on b4. But he's still got his passer, and he's kept his pieces protected and coordinated. Rook f4 check. Oh, and I should say this one was more of a thunderbolt. Rook f4 check. Look at that move. Daniel Naroditsky and also Danny Wrench, they just went absolutely nuts over this move. You know, finding it with seconds on the clock. So if the king captures here, there's this fork. That's the idea. Magnus is just insane. So king d3 was played. Now we had rook g4, probing against this pawn. The knight covers this one. Queen b7 check. And now this is just another great move. Knight to d5 was played. I mean, I'd be looking at, say, king g3 maybe. Black carries on checking. But knight d5, just fearless from Magnus. King e2 played. Rook e4 check. King d3. And now f3 covers that rook. Everything is protected. Queen b2 check. King g3. Queen b1 preparing to check there. Now the knight came to f4, and here we see another brilliant remaneuver from Magnus. So after the king goes with the check, now it comes to e6. Again, it's still protected by the rook. So instructive. King g1 check, but now it's coming up the board. Queen g1 check, rather. But here comes the king. So queen g6, just excellent defense from Fabi, but king e5. It's really marching in to shepherd the pawn home. And this was a shot which Daniel Naroditsky saw. So you could have gone queen f6 check, king d6 and pick up the f-pawn. But even so, after rook d4 check, it's still so hard for black to play. And I'll give you an example. You should go king c2 here, not king c3. Because then after the pawn moves, you can bring the queen across, pin the pawn. You know, you've left this third rank clear. The king's not there. Just crazy stuff. So hard for black to defend. So we didn't have queen f6 check. We had king c3, getting that king active. But then pawn c5 comes. Queen h5 check, king d6. Look at that pawn. The queen took on f3 now, and here apparently Magnus blows it. It becomes a perpetual when you run it with the engines, because you should go rook d4, but he goes rook e5. But in practical human terms, it's just impossible to stop that c-pawn now. So queen d3 check, rook blocks, and now queen g3 check apparently holds a draw, but again, you'd have to keep finding only moves. You know, it's craziness. We had this check, but now the pawn kicks on. g5, okay, Magnus just chops it. King c4, I mean, they're just chucking pieces. They've got no time. Rook c5 check, king b4, and now Magnus, he's just trying to arrange the pieces to push home the pawn. Now, this gives you an example of the time pressure. Queen's attacked, Fabi goes king b3. I mean, they're pre-moving. Does Magnus take? No, he drops here. Pre-moving, like I say. Now king b2, king d7, check. Don't block with the pawn. You're literally going to lose your rook. That's now a draw. Instead, the king comes back. Queen a6, the pawn is pinned. So again, some shuffling from Magnus. He wants to make progress, and he just brings this rook around. I mean, his judgment and just piece play is insane in the time pressure. He blocks again. Now the pawn's going through. Check. King here. Queen comes. Rook comes. Check. King moves. And this knight is such a good defender of the king. There are no checks anywhere. The pawn's going to promote. What an insane game by Magnus Carlsen. And this is the match score that I wanted to share with you. So Magnus Carlsen beat Fabiano Caruana 22-4. I mean, utter insanity. He didn't lose a single game against one of the strongest players of the last 10 to 15 years. Magnus is just overpowered right now, the absolute GOAT in my opinion. What do you do about him when he's in this kind of form? So this is the position from one of their 3+1 games, and Magnus hits Fabi with a deadly trap. So f5 is played by Fabi. We have captures, pawn recaptures, and rook f8 sets it up. Fabi falls into it with rook to d3. How do you finish the game on the spot here with white? So the move that Magnus plays is rook e4 checkmate. Just a stunning, stunning checkmate. The pawn is pinned. This one covers the escape square. This king covers the escape square. This one does a job. I mean, how beautiful is that? And to find it with seconds on the clock, what a performance from Magnus Carlsen. If you want to see another phenomenal game by him, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.